Good evening all, and welcome. The police certainly do not have an easy job on their hands. Be warned, some of these stories are graphic and extremely disturbing. But without further ado, it's time to put your sirens on, get comfortable, and let the darkness take control. A number of years ago, I was employed as a small-town cop in a remote northern Australian location. The town was a popular tourist spot, but crime was rampant. Breaking and entering an automobile theft was particularly popular. It was 2 a.m. on a somewhat slow night shift. My partner and I were steadily patrolling the outskirts of town. The air was still and calm. It was your typical stuffy and humid tropical weather. The car's dispatch radio suddenly crackled to life, startling me, and I hear the slight, distorted, matter-of-fact female voice of one of our regular dispatchers. There's something slightly off about the tone though. Our dispatchers are amazing under pressure, but you hear the slight rushed and breathless deliveries of the incoming jobs. Whatever it has shaken our seasoned dispatcher. The broadcast is to all units. It comes in as Intruders On, which is a shortened version of Intruders on Premises. The job details are still just rolling out, but we don't even hesitate. Intruders On is a priority call. Dispatch fills us in as we race to the address. A young woman living alone has cranked up her air conditioning in her bedroom. She then snuggled under a thick doona for the night and texted her cousin for a bit before falling asleep. She awoke feeling something was off, to see the figure of a man standing in her room watching her. Amazingly, she did not scream or give off a reaction that she's awake. She shifted as if she was still asleep and curled further under the covers. She then blindly felt around for the mobile phone that she'd discarded on her bed earlier that evening. Under the covers of her thick doona, she texted her cousin about the man standing in her room. Her cousin was the one on the phone conveying everything to our call takers. The victim was conveying that the man was simply standing by her bed during the minutes that they were taking to get there. She could occasionally hear his breathing and movements when he shifted. We debated turning our red and blues on, but declined for fear of the intruder panicking and trying to hurt her. We get there, a heartbeat after another unit. In the darkness, I could make out 2 other officers moving around the front. As our car screeched to a stop, the headlights catch a man fleeing from the far side of the house. He's barefoot and bounding across the driveway when our guys on foot spot him. We join the chase. The bloke is overweight and doesn't get far running down the road barefoot. We nab him, and I'm surprised how normal he looks. He's a bit scruffy, a bogan and unkempt, but pretty average. He later admitted that he likes breaking into women's homes and watching them sleeping. This crime made him feel powerful, and he enjoyed invading other people's privacy and violating their sense of safety. He refused to disclose his other actions, but it was obvious that this had been going on a while. The call came out as a simple suspicious person at a large nursing home with not that much more detail. Myself and a buddy showed up to find a woman waiting out front next to her vehicle. The vehicle was off, and she carried a baby with her, maybe 3 years old, but with those still cherubic baby angelic cheeks. The administrator tells me the woman in question, who I'll refer to as Tracy, is a contracted worker for them, a sort of nurse who comes in from time to help out with their elderly patients. She shows up on her day off and starts talking to this elderly gentleman, Joe. Tracy places her baby in Joe's lap and wheels him out of the facility, while Joe is screaming the whole time. They stop her, and she gets mad because they're holding her grandfather hostage, and she just wanted to take him for a walk. Only the thing is, Joe is not related to Tracy, and is a retired cop himself. Tracy then gets distracted, tries stealing medication, and scratches another nurse when they stop her. By all accounts, not 6 hours earlier, Tracy was an ordinary woman. She went to work without complaint, seemed happy, then went home with no history of drug use, no history of mental illness. The facility was reluctant to pursue charges due to the sudden abrupt shift in her personality. It was like she'd been replaced by another woman who looked just like her but was criminally insane. While speaking to her, Tracy seems normal. She tells me in a very calm and obvious not crazy voice what she's doing and why. She gives me all the information and doesn't cause any problems or give me reason to take her into custody. And Joe didn't want to press the charges, and the facility declined as well. The only thing giving me cause was that something was wrong with Tracy, insisting Joe was her grandfather, which we proved she was not. My only other recourse was a sort of emergency custody order, but I had no reason to do so. Our son looked well cared for, so we elected to call for family to arrive. Her father showed up and confirmed that Tracy was okay. She didn't take any drugs and had never complained about mental health or physical ailments that would lead us to believing something was wrong. I even spoke to a magistrate about securing charges to get her treated, since she refused to do so on her own, but he declined right off. The only option we had was the father trying to get a custody order against her. He took a few minutes speaking to her before pulling me aside and saying, "I can tell you that the woman looks like my daughter, but that's not my daughter." All this is happening. I hear the car door open and the doors lock. My stomach dropped, though I couldn't tell you why. Consider it a sixth sense all cops have, or I issued after time spent on the force. Sometimes someone sets off a trigger you can't explain, and you better listen to it. Inside the car, Tracy is holding her bouncing little boy in her arms. I knock on the window and ask if we can talk some more, and she refuses. Ask if her father can hold the baby, and she tells me, "That's not my father." I try to negotiate while my supervisor, who witnessed the whole thing thankfully, tries the other door. He took over talking to her while I positioned myself on the other side of the car, trying to open the door handles. Both our warning flags were going off and we couldn't say why. She gave no reason and we had no cause. Then Tracy says, "You're just trying to take away my baby." She pulls the baby into her chest and the baby stops laughing. It stops breathing, and the little jerk on its hand tells me that it's not breathing. It took 3 swings of my baton to break the glass. All the while the supervisor is screaming at me to get in. I crawl across the broken glass, reach across the seat, pulling the baby's head from her arms. It lets out a bloody wail, and Tracy looks at me in the face. I see the driver's side door open, and Tracy just smiles at me. "You're trying to take my baby, you white devil." I felt like it happened in an instant. Tracy bares her teeth and bites the baby. I hear the baby screaming in pure pain. I reach forward, wrapping my arms around her lower jaw and upper forehead, and pulled the baby off her. Tracy goes limp, and grandfather takes the baby inside to be treated. He lived, but we never found his ear. I saw her later in court after all the charges were dismissed, in lieu of lifetime commitment to a mental institution. All of the life gone from her eyes, just like that night. The lights were on but no one was home. I still can't explain how an otherwise healthy and vibrant person can go from 0 to crazy just like that, and it haunts me to this day more than any ghost story I've ever heard. We have this impound facility that we contract throughout our city. After a lot of incidents where the people have died inside the wreckage, the vehicles are brought to this place for the bodies to be cut out of public view. Additionally, a lot of bad wrecks where people have died are brought here. All of them, actually. Pretty much every person on the staff at this place says that it's haunted. One of our forensic technicians will not go there alone when they process a vehicle. They basically told me that one time they were there and they said that there was someone sitting in one of the cars that was part of a fatal accident. The technician went to get an employee when they returned to the car, and it was now empty. This is a locked down, secure warehouse with only one way in and one way out. Being interested, I started to ask the employees more about it every time I had to go there. One time, the guy that worked there showed me a video of myself walking around, and I guess what you could call an orb flying through the air where I was. I know they're regarded as bottom of the barrel when it comes to visual evidence, but it was a very stark and unusual image on the surveillance footage. There was another incident, a decade-old light bulb turning on in an attic that hadn't been used at all. The guy called, thinking someone had actually broken into his attic. It was so strange to him. To make it a little creepier, he had put some dead people's clothes right beneath the attic. And then there's the motion detectors for alarms at houses that just go off in the middle of the night, with no fans or air movement whatsoever. I've been to so many damn alarms, I have a pretty good understanding of how they work, and there have been 3 or 4 that have just had no explanation whatsoever. I was dispatched to a house at about 1 AM for a prowler. We get there and talk to the resident. Long story short, they saw 2 people wearing masks, one Jason-style hockey mask, and I don't remember the other one, who were in the yard across the street. It was 2 weeks past Halloween, so it seemed believable. We checked the area and don't see anything. 10-8. It's worth noting the residents didn't seem drunk, high, or crazy at all. A few times you'll get similar calls, and get there and you'll find the resident is strung out on meth and seeing things. However, back to the story. An hour later we get the call back. This time we have our dispatcher on the phone with them while we're surrounding the area. We, about 5 of us, are in a perfect position, and dispatch can tell us they can still see the prowlers in the next yard. We start moving in. Dispatch says the residents saw the 2 prowlers wave and move into the shed. Guess where I am? That's right, next to the shed. I give verbal commands, bang on the door, and there's nothing. Screw it, fine, I'll come in after you. The door's open, and it's empty. I even think to check for a trapdoor, but there's nothing. It's raised about 4 inches off the ground, so there isn't even a possibility of a door leading out. Again, I check the area and find nothing. I talked to the residents, and they said, as I was moving into the shed, the 2 put their fingers to their lips, giving the shh sign, and then they both waved. They moved into the shed as I was next to it. We went over every possibility trying to come up with an explanation. If the caller was just messing with us, they had no prior history of it, as in repeated calls for service at the address. I'm not much of a believer in paranormal stuff, but I can still appreciate a situation where I cannot logically explain what I had just seen. My mother responded to a call late one night. The neighbors said that there was activity in the house and no one lived there, so they were freaked out. My mum and her partner get in there and start going through the house to see if there's anyone there. Since there was no power, they went with flashlights. My mum went into a room and the flashlight went out, and she had a weird feeling like someone was watching her, so she left the room. They left and said they didn't find anything. The next day they get the same call, but this time during the day. They searched the house again, and my mum went back into the room where her flashlight went out and opened the closet door and found a voodoo or Santeria shrine. She thought the reason that her flashlight went out that night was because of that someone was doing some ritual there to get them away from the police. I was sitting monitoring a stop sign late at night, somewhere around 2 to 3 in the morning. The area was notoriously known for a gruesome murder that has still gone unsolved. While sitting there, I noticed something shoot across the back of my car in my rearview mirror. As I was looking in the mirror trying to see what was behind my car, the black shadow shot up the driver's side of my car, then across the front of it. Creeped out, I realized it was time to get the hell out of there and gunned it down the road. Our video cameras in the car are set to turn on automatically at certain speeds, so it turned on. I decided to review the camera to see if something really did cross in front of my car. During the point where something should have went in front of my car, the camera went completely dark, like something blocked its lens. Needless to say, I didn't monitor that stop sign anymore. An old auditorium on my beat is haunted. The seats in the audience section creak as if people are sitting there, and there is enough open space in the attic section for the wind to create whispers that sound like people. We end up there so often, we have a set of keys to the place. My partner at the time had found one of the doors open, so we went to sweep it. It was a lot bigger on the inside than the creepy factory was high on mids. A mannequin scared the piss out of me in the orchestra pit, and we kept hearing whispers and what sounded like doors opening and closing everywhere. The damn place was so huge you could spend a week in there with an X-ray machine and still not find someone hiding in there. We get to the backstage area and find a narrow room with boxes of costumes on shelves and other stuff. One of those boxes decides to randomly jump off the shelf. My partner screamed and nearly shot the room up. We left after that one and only go there with a small squad now. I used to be a security officer at a homeless shelter earlier this year. I worked there for 5 months before leaving. I have tons of scary stories from my time there. But anyway, back in March, I was at work doing what I needed to do. On the ground floor was a daytime-only homeless shelter, and on the top was a government homeless outreach office. This is who my contract was though, but I had to keep the entire building secure even though the shelter was a different organization. The government office was the mental health branch, so it wasn't uncommon for crazy people to, well, act crazy. This particular day, an individual came up to pick his meds. The man took the medication, walked over to the couch that sits in the office, as the place is laid out like a doctor's office, and I was posted in the lobby. And after sitting down, the guy starts digging through his backpack and pulls out a bag full of white pills. This then catches my attention. He grabs his pocket knife but doesn't open the blade and smashed 3 to 4 pills, uses his hands to make the dust into 3 lines, then snorts all the dust. What remained, he swept and flung off the table. This is now considered to be acting hostile and potentially illegal, so I walk over and start trying to ask the man to leave. He keeps telling me that he's got to take his meds, and I inform him that he needs to leave some more. Then he says out loud without looking at me, "You know, I got a suppressed 9mm in my bag that'll make you and Betty the receptionist shut up." Alarm bells start ringing. I now have a potentially active shooter scenario in my hands, and I'm an unarmed officer. I calmly walk backwards to the receptionist and whisper to her to get the other client up, call 911 and go lock herself in an exam room and do not open the doors. She does this as well as inform the other caseworker of the situation, and they all lock and barricade the doors. There are cameras in the lobby, so this was all recorded and turned over to the police. After many other attempts to get the man to leave and inform him that the police were called and en route, he gets up, gets in my face and tells me quietly, I'm coming back for you one day," and storms out. The police arrive 5 minutes later, examine the footage, and put out an APB on the man, and take samples of the powder left on the table. A few days later, I'm informed that the man was found with no guns and no drugs. The powder turned out to be antipsychotic medication. He had allegedly lost the bottle they came in. Nothing bad happened. But still, as a 19-year-old unarmed security guard, it scared the crap out of me. For those curious, I still work at the same company. I now work third shift in a completely different location. So to the crazy homeless dude who threatened me, let's not meet again. From my early 20s to my mid to late 30s, I was a Garda officer in Ireland. That's what we call the police in Ireland. I served a small community on the west coast, isolated from any other community. No trains, no nearby airport, no taxis, no Uber, and only one bus a day. This is probably the only reason they had their own Gardaí station. Most other small hamlets just rely on Gardaí from the nearest town, but given this town's absolute isolation in a very small country, they needed this station. The hamlet covered a wide area of farm plots and a number of empty and derelict properties. When Ireland became industrialized, most people in these rural communities moved out to go to the cities in hopes of easier and better paying jobs. The hamlets have a very creepy feeling to them. Most residents here are some of the most down-to-earth people on the planet. But to the story. Our Gardaí station consisted of 3 112 dispatchers. Most calls were routed to another 112 center. Around 7 officers, most from out of town, and we all knew each other well. And when we do get a call from the area, even if it's not an important issue, most of us come down just so that we have something to do during our long shifts with very little activity. One night we received a call from a landline phone, originating from a derelict property on the edge of the hamlet, isolated from the other plots of land. I was asked to go alone, as every officer this side of the county was attending a fatal 3-car and 2-lorry crash that occurred on a nearby motorway. So I walked outside to the cold wind blowing over my skin. I got in my car and drove down to the property. No light, no sirens. The call had been a hang-up and lasted no longer than 13 seconds according to dispatch. As I pulled up to the blackened, beat-up property, I felt a shiver go down my spine. The old wooden farmhouse gave a feeling that I cannot describe or put into words. I didn't feel like I was welcome. I got out of the car, walked to the front of the property, opened the moldy wet gate, and slowly approached the tall front door. I knocked heavily and exclaimed, "Hello? This is Officer McNeil. I'm from the Gardaí. Would you let me in?" I got no response. After waiting 20 or so seconds, I knock again and asked, "Hello? I'm afraid that if you do not open the door, I may have to make forced entry. Please, come to the door. This is the Gardaí." There was no response again. I almost wished there was though, just so that I would feel less lonely and vulnerable. I got on the radio and asked dispatch for backup, and that there could be people in the property, and that I needed to make a forced entry, as no one was answering the door. They replied saying that I should keep an eye on the property, and that they could have an officer there from the closest town in just over 25 minutes. I grunted to myself and thanked dispatch. I strolled back to my car, but before I could reach to open the gate at the front of the house, I looked back and saw an old, ill-looking man, unshaven, stare down at me from an attic window. I stared back in shock, pulled out my flashlight and turned it on. I flashed it at the window and the man ducked. I shouted up, "Sir, you need to come down and get the door. I need to talk to you. We have more Garda officers on the way. Come downstairs." I was unsettled by what this was turning into. I informed dispatch of the man, and they replied saying that they would inform the incoming Garda car that they should turn on the sirens and to get down there as fast as possible. Dispatch seemed uneasy to say the least. I stood by the front gate, still no one at the front door, just scanning all the windows expecting to see the face. I couldn't get the man's face out of my mind. He looked so disturbed. After maybe 20 minutes of the occasional knock on the door, and the expected non-existent reply, the car finally pulled up. I informed the two officers inside of the situation as we approached the front door, and one of the officers exclaimed in a deep, angry voice, "Sir, please get to this door before we have to get the door for you, as it appears you will not get the door. We need to inform you how this is going to work. We will knock down the door upon our entry. You will stand hands up on the other side of the room we will enter from. We will handcuff you and you will be taken to the station, questioned or detained. If you have a problem with this, then be sure to ask when you're in our Garda cars, that is." The officer was so demanding, I almost felt like he was talking to me. He was very tall and threatening. We walked back to his car, and he took out what we call the big red key, which is a big hunk of metal that we use to break down doors safely while not damaging the door. The two officers grabbed the key, walked to the door, and said, 1, 2, 3, barrage, and hit the door 4 solid times before it fell down in one big thump. The house was now open. We grabbed our flashlights in one hand and tasers in the other. We took our first steps inside, and I could hear the shards of glass crunching under our feet. The other officer shouted, "Sir, Garda officers have entered the property. Please reveal yourself with your hands in the air. We are armed with tasers that we are authorized to use." We moved forwards slowly, shining the small beams of white light into all corners of the apparently empty living room. Upon noticing the absence of the man in this single downstairs room, we shone our lights at the crooked-looking stairs. But before we could even move to the stairs, a man jumped from the upper floor and onto the stairs. And I mean jumped. He looked insane with his large red eyes staring into my soul. I shouted at the massive beast of a man, "Sir, please place your hands above your head Before I could finish my sentence, the man charged down the stairs, yelling. One of the officers screamed, "Taser!" and the man let out a gut-wrenching yell of pain as he flopped to the ground, and we ran towards him, handcuffs ready. We grabbed the man, who wouldn't stop rambling on about a supposed big man who gave him food every day. We placed him in the back of my car. The other officers drove behind me as we went back to the station. In the car, I did the ordinary, told him his rights and everything that comes with that. But before I could finish, he kept asking if I could tell his ex-wife to get out of the car, because she kept being rude. I told him that it was just him and I in the car, but he wouldn't stop going on about it. We arrived at the station. We walked the man up to the front desk, and when asked for his name, he just replied, "The man you all want to know." Eventually, we put his name and other information simply as unknown. The next day, we were told the man was going to be picked up by the Irish Intelligence Service. Apparently, one of my colleagues had got the name out of the man. He was wanted for stalking a minor, child abuse, 3 charges worth, as well as possession of indecent imagery. Knowing what this creepy man had been involved in made it so much worse for me to think about. Once the service came to pick him up, the man told every officer in the station that he would find a way to get us and do what God has told me to do. So whoever you are, I really hope we don't meet again. A friend of a friend, who's a young woman, was alone on a small road at night, and a fallen tree was blocking the road. She gets out to pull it off the road and climbs back in her car. The car appears right behind her, and she gets really stressed. The car follows her close and all, and she stops at the police station and immediately runs inside. The guy in the car does too. She immediately tells the cops the man has been following her for a few kilometers, and before he can say anything, another policeman grabs him, arrests him, and puts him in handcuffs. He explains himself. While the girl was moving the tree, he arrived behind her and saw a man enter the trunk of her car. The cops checked. There was indeed a man in her trunk, several times a rapist. I'm a photographer for a local TV station. One day I was told to go shoot a video at a house where someone was killed that morning. When I arrived, no one was home. I started shooting video and smoked a cig, and after a while a car pulled up and two people got out yelling at me hysterically. Turns out they were the parents of the boy who was killed. It goes deeper. The boy was killed by his own brother in front of their mother. They started arguing and one broke a pool cue in half and the other one pulled out a knife and stabbed him. The parents were beyond mad that I was there, and the dad started to push me and threatening to beat me up. He said that the news was lying about everything. I told him that if he beats me up he would be in jail too, and he started to calm down, and I offered to show him the press release that the police sent out, explaining that it was all the information we were given, and I offered for them to tell the real story. The mother agreed to do an interview and tell her story, the real story. After they invited me into their house and I spoke for a while, bumped her for a few smokes, and headed back to the station. They went from wanting to beat the crap out of me to crying on my shoulder. It was one of the few opportunities to show people that the news is not out to get you and that we just have a job to do like everyone else. I'm a police officer in the southern US, in a suburban department of about 100 sworn officers. I work in a college town, and I've been on about 10 years now, made sergeant 4 years ago. But at the time of this story, I was just 2 years on, working night shift patrol. I've been lucky that not a lot has affected me mentally during my career. I don't have kids, and that's how it gets to you usually. You can build all the mental walls you want, but when you have an emotional connection with your kids and see something happen to kids, the walls mean nothing. Anyway, this one stuck with me. It still makes my hairs stand on end, especially when it rains. It was September, just after midnight. I get put on a call of shots fired. Now normally these calls turn out to either be fireworks or perhaps a car backfiring, but mostly fireworks. So unless we get multiple calls on it or a confirmed gunman or something, we just send one unit. That night, it was me. The shots fired was reported around a college football stadium. This was during football season, so there were a bunch of really big white tents set up all around the parking lot for tailgaters. I notified dispatch that I was on the scene and started rolling through the parking lots, casting my spotlight here and there. It was raining pretty heavily and quite hard to see. About halfway through the lots, my spotlight illuminated the silhouette of a man sitting in a folding chair under one of those big tents. I pulled closer up to him and lit him up, and notified dispatch that I was out there with one in the parking lot. His back was to me, and he appeared to be hunched forwards, as if his elbows were on his knees and his head leaning forward. I walked towards him and started calling out to him. I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was something like, "Hey man, you okay? You heard anything strange? Can you come talk with me?" He didn't answer. As I drew closer, I lit him up with my flashlight, and then noticed the outline of a shotgun on the pavement next to him. Combined with him not answering and the nature of the call, it was enough for me to break leather and have dispatch hold the channel. I kept calling to him as I approached, asking him to show me his hands. 30 feet, 20 feet, 10 feet. My handgun, a Glock Model 22, had a Streamlight TLR-1 light on it. So, I lit him up. 6 feet under his tent with him. 5 feet, 4 feet. I close up on him, come around the front of him. Shotgun suicides are difficult. Often if they put the barrel under their chin, the blast from the barrel will blow the gun out from under their chin before the shot even hits them. There was a guy in my hometown that succeeded in a shotgun suicide only because he did it in front of a pond. Put the barrel under his chin, pulled the trigger, only managed to blow his face off. The coroner said he probably ran around screaming throughout the hole that used to be his mouth before he drowned in the pond. This guy succeeded. Blew his head clean off. You do this job long enough, you'll notice funny little details. His elbows were indeed resting on his knees. It was as though he blew his head off, set the shotgun on the ground next to him, and then leaned forwards and rested his elbows on his knees to think about what he'd done. About that time I noticed that even though I was under the tent with him, I felt like it was still raining. And then I looked up. I've seen so many more failed suicides than I have seen successful ones. And with the successful ones, there's no sense of closure. No sense at the scene that it was the right choice and things went as they should have done. Or that this was planned. The phrase suicide isn't the answer has more than one meaning. Yes, it's not the best solution to whatever problem there is, but when you're on the scene of a successful suicide, it's permeated with an almost ethereal sense of, this wasn't supposed to be. The effort it takes you to end your life is tenfold what it takes to seek out help and solutions for your problems, if for the simple fact that your body and mind primarily want nothing more than to live. I've seen both ends of the system, and am well aware of where mental health care has its shortcomings. But in that broken system, there are people who genuinely want to help, and who are desperate to find someone who genuinely needs help. I worked with a retired police officer / Vietnam veteran. The guy had some of the craziest stories I had ever heard. One in particular was haunting. He and his partner were answering a domestic abuse call at someone's house. The call came from the neighbors, who stated there was a history of violence at this location. They arrived, and after no responses at the door, they forced entry. Searching the house room to room, they find the wife / mother in a bloody mess, apparently beaten to death and laying in her own bed. As they continued to search, they noticed blood throughout the house, both upstairs and down. They also started smelling shit. They initially thought one of them had stepped in some dog crap, but they were wrong. They eventually found the kid, about 8 to 9 years old, dead, in a bloody mess in one of the back rooms of the house. The husband / stepfather had bludgeoned the wife in the bedroom over an argument, and when the son woke up from the noise and entered the master bedroom, the guy attacked the kid. The kid somehow managed to escape the initial attack and tried to flee. The kid ran, bleeding throughout most of the house before his stepdad caught him. The shit smell was from the kid shitting his pants in fear as he tried to run away. The guy fled the scene and managed to end his own life before he was caught. It was a tough story for him to tell me, and it still haunts me to this day. I work for the Coast Guard. We received a call from the local police department. They were working a missing persons case of a mentally unstable individual. I don't remember if he was off his meds or escaped hospital custody or whatever, but his mother had called the police because she was worried about him being suicidal. The family had a small center console boat that they kept on a pier not far from our station, so they asked us to go take a look. On our way there, we came across a vessel underway, matching the description with a single male on board. We attempted to pull alongside when the guy throttled up and took off. We were in a no-wake zone, so we were previously idling towards each other, and we came about and gave chase. The guy wouldn't stop and was heading out of the inlet towards the ocean. Then, without warning, he came to a complete stop, pulled a gun out, and shot himself in the head. It definitely messed us up. The worst part of it was having to put the boat into a side tow to bring it in, and having his bile pump spray bloody water all over our rib. My dad was a cop, and this is one of his stories. When my older brother was about 6 months old, my dad was a detective. He got a call to go to a house just around the corner from where we lived. When he got there, he found a mother and an 8-month-old baby. The baby was screaming and crying and had a huge burn on its stomach. He took them to the hospital. On the way, he found out the mother's boyfriend had gotten mad at the baby, so he put a hot frying pan on top of it, which pinned it to the ground. The mother had heard the screaming, but it was too late. He said he'd never heard a baby cry like that before. The best part, however, was that the boyfriend showed up to the hospital. He was this big, tough, biker-looking dude, so he had this mentality that no one would cross him. Dad, being a detective, wasn't in a police uniform, so the guy didn't expect him to do anything. When the guy got close enough, as he was making a scene saying to give him his girlfriend and kid, and started to get violent, and even hurt a nurse's wrist, my dad picked up a metal pan nearby and knocked him over the head. His head split open a bit, so he needed stitches. The doctor was the same one who helped save the baby's life. He was so mad at the guy that he didn't give him an antiseptic or painkiller while stitching him up. The guy cried and screamed, saying it was cruelty. No one cared, and no officer listened after seeing what he had done to that baby. I've tried past life regression a few times, only having 2 experiences with it working, but not in the way I imagined. Both times were very blurry to me. The one experience I got most of my information from was this. I was sitting on my bed, and I was looking at a big dresser with a mirror back and a wardrobe attached to it, like something you might see at your grandparents' house. When I noticed the items on the dresser, I thought to myself, these are my things. I then excitedly go through them. What I remember sticking out the most was an old-fashioned cigar lighter, like the one you'd see on a desk in the 1930s. In the dream, when I picked up the cigar lighter, I flicked it a few times, but it wouldn't light. Then I remembered my name was engraved on it. So I flipped it over, and sure enough, the engraving was there. It was blurry, and I couldn't read it. So then I looked in the wardrobes. There were about a dozen 50s to 60s style suits, like they used to use for daily wear. But above them on a shelf was a box or frame with a couple of badges/patches on them. They had white triangles and a letter on the center. I thought, these are my old civil defense badges. Then the dream ended. Now when I woke up, I thought to myself, what the hell is civil defense? So I looked it up on the internet, and it was an organization during World War II. But as I was scrolling, I saw one of the insignias that matched the patch/badge in my wardrobe. It was the insignia of the Civil Defense Auxiliary Police. The only other time I tried past life regression, I dreamed I was by the stands at a baseball field listening to 2 men in suits talking. If anyone has any similar experiences with past life regression or any information on the meaning of these items, feel free to let me know. My Krav Maga instructor has told me many of his stories. He has served in warrants, SWAT, the police, and the Marines for a short time. Here are some of the stories he shared with us. The first. He'd been serving a warrant for a man who had been wanted for drug distribution. They get a call that there was potential drug use at a nearby trailer that was abandoned after the man inside died of alcohol poisoning. My instructor, along with his team, had kicked the door in and found the biggest mess they'd ever seen. There was almost a hay bale of marijuana and a chunk of crack about the size of a bowling ball. There were bags of meth and cocaine everywhere. There had to be at least a few $100,000 worth of drugs here, and there was a heavy scent of gasoline in the trailer. And realizing what he'd just found, he thought they might have gasoline on hand ready to set it on fire. They all left standing outside and waiting for the scene to be secured and all the evidence collected, when a trail of fire in the distance went right up to the trailer and engulfed it in flames. They happened to have some fire extinguishers which they managed to use to get out parts of the fire. In the end, only some meth and cocaine was found. The man who was wanted was found drowned in a nearby swamp. No suspects were named, and the case is cold. The second is while working in the police force in Philadelphia, he came across many muggings. One in particular was especially heartbreaking. A little boy of 8 was mugged for his Jordans. The little boy refused to hand over his Jordans, as it turned out they had been a birthday gift. The mugger, a man of about 5'8", had beaten the boy to death and taken his shoes. The witnesses only knew that the man was about 5'8" and had braided hair, and it could have been virtually anyone. The man was later caught in a home invasion and got 47 years to life. The last story I heard was while he was a cop in Philadelphia. He'd been in the Kensington area and found a woman stabbed to death under a sleeping bag in a room above a tattoo parlor. The woman's name was Amanda O'Donnell. He'd gotten the call over the radio and heard all the nasty details. Blood everywhere, seething out of her wounds and soaking the carpet. My partner and I get a radio call for a welfare check. Ex-boyfriend called because he received text from his ex stating that she wished it would not have ended and that she would no longer go on without him. We get to her place, knock, pound, and there's no answer. We call the number provided by the ex and get an answer and hang up. So, we hear it from the outside window, and we know she's there. We say we're going to break down the door if she doesn't answer, and hear some splurred mess of speech. The door unlocks but doesn't open. We open the door and find a young woman, wet, naked, pale as hell and swaying in one spot. Her hands are bleeding, and we call a rescue ambulance and she's off to the hospital. Now the creepy part. None of the lights would turn on, so we conduct a safety search and find candles lit in the bedroom and bathroom. On the walls were Bible scriptures written in her blood, and a tub of brown water. The water was mixed with old blood. I don't know how she survived, because that water was dark, and she had been sitting there for approximately 3 to 4 hours. I was about 8 or 9 years old. My family always camped at the desert. My dad had been going to Glamis, California for 25 plus years and had taken me since I was a baby as well. My parents had separated when I was young, and my dad married a woman and she had 2 sons. So, Glamis is a very large desert. Mostly sand dunes with large areas graded for RV, trailer and vehicle parking. A lot of people go to Glamis. It's a party desert. A lot of extremely dangerous and deadly things have gone down out there. Some really bad accidents and deaths I've personally seen myself over the years. They have since upgraded their safety measures 100%, but this was 2003 or so. Back then, only the Rangers had SUVs, so all you had to do was outrun them, ride up a dune on your quad or buggy, and just stand there basically. The dunes are large and completely soft sand, obviously, and SUVs won't be able to follow you. Most people will drunk drive though, and horrible things do happen. You'll hear about them, roll up on the scene, or actually witness it sometimes. During the day there was no problems. Everyone was having a great time at large meeting spots, racing each other, going to vendor rows, which was likely a tiny strip mall made of tents that sold everything. But at night people were drunk and it could be dangerous. If you had a family with small children, you didn't ride at night. One more detail I need to mention to set the scene before my story. Oldsmobile Hill is a gigantic sand dune in a very big valley where hundreds of people meet up during the day and night to race up the hill, show off their new buggies and trucks, and to party hard. Girls Gone Wild used to be out there all that time at night. Since people were getting into accidents, even children had died in horrible accidents, so rangers decided to start closing Oldsmobile Hill down at around 9 PM and patrolling with a helicopter around the area. It also used to be used for life flight. Now that you kind of understand Glamis and the layout, here we go. I was around 8 or 9. We went camping in Glamis with about 8 or so other motorhomes parked in a big circle with a big fire pit in the middle. My dad had a crazy awesome buggy, 1100 horsepower, and for 2003 that was insane. All the people were camping who had really badass buggies, and we also happened to be camping with Robbie Gordon at the time. He's a professional NASCAR and Baja racer for those who don't know. Total dick, by the way. It was late. We'd already had dinner, and the adults were getting absolutely smashed by the fire. All the kids in camp hung out and played with glow sticks and stuff and rolled around in the dirt. Now, my stepmom and dad had wild fights. They got into some huge ones, and it was super awkward because everyone there heard it and knew about it. My dad walks over to his buggy, throws off the tarp, and starts getting ready to leave camp. Even at 9 I knew this was bad. I knew he had been drinking all day long and was super angry and begged him not to go. My stepmom begged him too, and the rest of the people were just watching like, whoa. Some older man even asked him whether he thought it was a good idea or not. But my dad ignored us, taking off and spraying 20 feet of sand with his paddle tires. It didn't hit us, he was just being dramatic. So now we're all stressed out, and I remember my stepbrother not caring and going into the trailer to watch movies and lie down. The other kids had gone to bed as well at some point, and it was just me, my stepmom, and all the adults at the fire. They commented saying some things about how weird it was, and that they hoped he wouldn't do anything stupid. Not caring that I was sitting right there and absolutely silently freaking out. Literally, Robbie freaking Gordon at the fire, and my dad is the topic of conversation? It still sounds so weird to me how this all happened. Hours go by. We're waiting. I think some people were just waiting with us, honestly, as it had been at least 4 hours, when he comes flying into camp. He slams on the brakes, skids about 10 feet, shuts off the engine and starts silently but frantically putting the tarp over his buggy, essentially hiding it. Everyone is watching. What are you doing, they say. You know where I'm heading with this. My dad takes off drunk in the middle of the night with an 1100 horsepower below his feet at the desert on a holiday weekend. So he's acting super weird now. He puts his hood up, he's kind of walking around almost pacing, then he notices us and comes slowly over to the fire and just sits slow in a chair and basically says nothing. Even at my age I knew what I was seeing. I knew how wrong this was. I could see the others making weird faces at each other and whispering. I know my stepmom was repeatedly asking where he'd been, but he didn't respond during this entire 15-minute period. Well, my dad's back. Yes, it's weird, but I'm emotionally exhausted and it was late. Whatever happened, they'll figure it out. Not 5 minutes later, I'm getting into bed inside the trailer and finally laying down. And that's when I see sirens and lights come from every angle outside our camp. 6 cops in SUVs with full-blown lights and sirens and a large spotlight. They were screaming out of their megaphones my dad's name and screaming, "Get down on the ground." So while this is happening, I'm screaming at the window in the trailer. I get up and run outside, and some guy I don't even know from our camp grabbed me mid-sprint and was like, "No, you can't go to your dad right now," and kept me behind him. I realized he's probably right, and I was just screaming and crying and yelling my dad's name behind this dude. My stepmom, drunk, ran to my dad, shielding him from the cops with her hands outstretched, and they're screaming for my dad to put his hands up and walk forward slowly. I see some huge light come from out of nowhere, and it's a helicopter, spotlight and all, shining directly in the middle of camp where all of this is going down. It's circling the campsite, and I'm sobbing my face off. My stepmom is all about to fight some cops, and everyone in the camp had backed away and was sufficiently stunned. They've got my dad lying face down on the front of a cop SUV, cuffed. When all of a sudden the helicopter guy flying above us says on the loudspeaker, "Thanks for the ride, Brian," and flies off. That's when it got weird. All the cops began laughing, uncuffed my dad, and even my dad's laughing. They turned their lights and sirens off, and we were all stunned. There were no other words to describe how confused I feel. Turns out, it was all a big joke. I was very upset. It was horrible, but also incredible. Turns out my dad just drove around for a while and sobered up completely. He decided to head over to Oldsmobile since he knew it was closed and maybe he could go up it once or twice to mess around. He gets there, runs into a bunch of cops standing at the bottom and a helicopter sitting on top of the Oldsmobile itself. They flag him down and he literally thought he was in trouble. But after speaking with them, they needed to get the co-pilot up to the helicopter, and obviously they couldn't get him up there. So they asked my dad, and my dad, being the arrogant guy he was, decided to prop a wheelie while going uphill. Well, the cops loved it. Soon he was taking them all up rides on the hill, telling him to scare the crap out of this one guy. They lost track of time, and the officers were only out there for this one task, and were not part of patrolling the desert. So it's not like they were doing the very important job of helping people, and the helicopter was on standby until they received a call. So they had time to kill, and after a lot of fun, they thanked my dad and jokingly asked if there was a way to repay him. My dad literally asked them straight to do a fake arrest, and to his surprise they were all for it, including the pilot. He decided to come in all sneaky and weird to make it believable. Most of the camp thought it was pretty cool. Some of the adult men were really excited about it, but just having the worst traumatic thing ever happen to me at 9, I didn't think it was cool. My stepmom was beyond furious. I just remember being so angry about it. I can't remember if he talked to me after to comfort me. He wasn't really that kind of guy, or I just went to bed stunned. I knew it was a joke, but the emotional overload didn't go away. I had to ask my dad time and time again over the years if that even really happened, because it was so insane how flawlessly they pulled it off. Now, I can see the cool part of it. I don't usually share this story with people because they think I'm being dramatic, but to the people who were there, they definitely remember. I even wonder if Robbie Gordon remembers. Never saw him again. Obviously, it doesn't end terrifying, but the emotions were real, and to this day I can still feel the anxiety I felt then, every time I think about it. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hoped you liked this extra long police stories video. Certainly some very terrifying things have happened to cops. I personally love reading these kind of stories, and when I looked, I realized I hadn't done it since March. Wow, that's like 7 months it's taken me to release another cop stories video. I'm gonna try and find them more frequently from now on because I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys enjoy them. If you do or did like the video, be sure to let me know by dropping a comment, leaving a like, all the good stuff. If you're new here, why not consider subscribing for new content nearly every night? And a huge thank you as always to my amazing patrons who are on screen. If you'd like a host of awesome perks given to you by me, then all that you need to do is sign up on Patreon to receive your perks. It costs a little bit every month, but it really helps support me and the channel, and I would really, really appreciate it. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.